All right. So my presentation is going to be on building a backend with Express.js. And we're going to mainly be focusing on making a REST API, which is like a very popular type of API for the backend. So here's just an overview of the contents we're going to go over. We're going to talk about why you need a backend API, and then second, you're going to talk about. I'm going to talk about what a REST API is. Third, I'm going to talk about the REST HTTP methods, and then fourth, I'll talk about what Express.js is, the library we're going to be using, and then what we're building with Express.js. And then I'll do a live share of my code. Okay, so why do we need a backend API? What's the point of having a backend API? So the backend API can be thought of as like a transportation layer between your front end code and your back end code. So let's say you need to access something from your backend or your database, for example, and you don't need to share the database username or password to every single front end that needs it. You need to create some sort of layer or some sort of access control to allow your front end to get that data that's stored on whatever server you're using. So the backend API allows a easy outlet for doing that. And so it can store persistent information such as user data and other state like server like infrastructure. And as I said before, it gives a layer so front end components can safely access the data. Because if you don't use a backend API, there's ways you can access the data, but it can be seen as unsafe. And it also allows you to do some work in between to validate what people are requesting. So like um, it's a stopgap essentially, where if someone's entering invalid queries or they're looking up something that they shouldn't be looking up, it can block them from doing that because it's all controlled in your backend API. So now I'm going to talk about what a REST API is. So REST is probably the most popular and the most prevalent API you are going to see people use, mainly because it's very easy to set up and it's pretty easy to understand how it works. It's straightforward. So REST is actually short for representational state transfer. That's a lot of words just to say that we're transferring the state from our backend server to our front end. So it's just transferring between those two. And usually people will often use JSON as the format, which is short for JSON, or sorry, JavaScript object notation. And the reason that this format is used is because it works really well with other programming languages, especially JavaScript. And it's very readable too. So if you look at JSON, if it's formatted properly, you can easily see like how the data is structured. All right. Now I'm going to talk about the HTTP methods that are in REST. So there's four main ones we're going to talk about. There's some other methods that are available, but we're not going to cover those in this workshop. But these are probably the and four most important endpoints you're going to use, or sorry, methods you're going to use. The other ones you're rarely going to ever see, so we're not going to go over those. So the first one we have here is a GET request, and what a GET request does is it just simply is a request that reads data from your backend and sends it over to the front end. It doesn't do any modification. It's only meant for looking and retrieving data. Post is a request that it does change stuff. So it writes data, but it's only for creating new things in your database. So for example, if I'm storing um, a collection of users and I want to create a new user, I would usually use a post request because that indicates, hey, I'm sending a request to create something. So I want to create a new user. I'm going to use post. The third option is delete, and this one is pretty straightforward. It's the opposite of post. It's a request to delete something that is on your backend. So if a user decides to delete their account, a delete request will be sent to your REST API, and then it will delete that user from the database. The fourth option is a little less common than the other three, but it's called patch. And with patch, it's basically it allows you to edit something that already exists on the back end. So let's say somebody changes their last name, a user changes their last name, we would send a patch request to the backend, and then in that request body, we would put the new last name they have, and it would just update it in the backend or the database to that new last name. So these are the main four that we are going to be using. So now what is Express.js? So if you weren't aware, this is the library we are going to be using for the demo, and I'm just going to talk about it. So Express.js, it's a very popular library for creating REST APIs. You can do other stuff with it too. You can actually host websites on it if you want, but usually it's going to be used with REST APIs. So one of the nice things about it is the syntax is really concise and you don't really need to type a lot to get stuff working. In fact, if you look at the code down here, this is pretty much most of the code you're going to write just to get the server up and running. So it's very readable and it's very easy to grasp what's going on. Also, since we use different formats for sending data, like JSON, for example, it can take care of parsing that JSON for you. You don't need to like manually parse the JSON every single time or serialize your object into JSON. It takes care of that for you. Right. And now I'm going to talk about what we're actually going to build. So our plan here is to create a to-do list in a REST API, essentially. So we're going to try to take advantage of all the stuff I previously just talked about. And I'm just going to go through some of the things we want to do in our to-do list app. So first, we're going to create get endpoints, and we're going to have two of them. So one of the get endpoints will allow us to get every single to-do we have and just return a list of all of them all at once. And then we're going to have another get endpoint that allows us to fetch a specific to-do with an ID. And so I'll pass an ID into my REST API, and then it'll give me that specific to-do back. The next thing we'll do is we'll create a post endpoint, which basically will allow us to create a new to-do. Then we'll create a patch endpoint, which allows us to modify an existing to-do. By the way, this patch endpoint in our use cases is mainly going to be used to edit whether the to-do is completed or not. It's not going to change much more than that. Because remember, we don't want to replace the entire thing. That would be a post request. The fourth thing we'll do is we'll implement the delete endpoint, which allows us to delete an already existing to-do. So I put the endpoint structure here just to see visually how it works. So here are both of our get requests. And you can see here when I do slash to-dos, it's going to return all to-dos that I have stored. And then if I do to-dos slash and then the brackets, they basically represent it's a parameter. So you can put the ID as a parameter here. So if I do to-dos slash one, it's going to return the to-do with ID one. And then next, we're going to do the creation endpoint, which is the same as the get endpoint, except we're just changing the method. And this basically allows us to create a new to-do. Then the patch endpoint, which updates an existing to-do, and we have to provide the JSON to update it to, and I'm going to talk about that below. And then we have the delete endpoint, which has the same path as the get endpoint here, but we are instead selecting by ID which to-do to delete. So down here is what the JSON structure looks like of a to-do. So right here, we have the ID of the to-do. It's just going to be a number, nothing too special here. And then we have a name. Then we have when it was due or when it is due, and then if it was completed or not. So basically with this JSON structure, we use this to update, create and update different entities in our database. And when we use a get request, we get this data returned back to us. So we're going to be using this structure in our code to basically construct and return different to-dos. All right, so now that that's been explained, we can go ahead and get to coding. So let me stop sharing um, my screen here. All right, cool. We're gonna open up your terminal app. So if you're on Windows, it'll be command prompt, and if you are on Mac, it's just gonna be terminal. So I'll open up my terminal here. Hold on. Okay, and we're just gonna create a new npm project. So the first thing we need to do is we need to create a folder for our project to live in. So I'll do a make directory, and then I need to put in the code that, or the name of the folder, which will be, just gonna call it Express Backend. Okay, and now we're going to move into that folder, and we are going to initialize our npm project. So we can do that easily by running npm init-y, right? And that will open up, or that will write that default package.json. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go ahead and open up VS Code. All right. And let me close that out and actually open up the folder we were in. So I'm going to go here. If you see the startup page, you're going to go to open. And then I'm going to go to my home folder where we created the directory, and I'm going to open that folder we just created. All right. So you can see we have our package.json here. So the first thing we are going to do is we're going to install Express.js. So we're going to open up our terminal in VS Code, and we're going to run npm I express. Okay. And this is going to install Express into our project. Is there any issues with that? Is everyone able to follow along here? All right, cool. So once that's installed, we are going to go ahead and create a new file. So we'll hit the new file button, and I'm just going to create a file called index.js. All right. So the first thing we need to do is we need to actually import Express. So we're going to do const express equals require Express, and this will import it. So after we import it, we just need to create a new Express instance. So I'm going to create, or not an instance, but an app. So I'll just say const app equals Express, and that will create a new Express app. All right, so now that we have our Express instance created, we can create some endpoints. So for this tutorial or demo, I'm just going to be storing the to-dos in a map. I'm not going to actually connect to a database or anything because that would take up way too much time. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to create a new map to store all of my to-dos. So put here create a map of to-dos. I'll say const to-dos equals new map. And this is a hash map, by the way. It's just called map in JavaScript, right? And I'm just going to, this is how I'm going to store my data essentially. So it's not going to stay after we restart my program, but it'll be stored somewhat when it's running. All right. So as I said earlier, we're going to have two get endpoints. So the first get endpoint is, so we're going to do get, and this endpoint returns all of the to-dos. So how do we set up an endpoint like that with Express? Well, it's pretty easy. You can just do app, and then you're going to type the method name. So we're using a get method here. So all you need to do is you just need to type get and the path you want it to get at. So in our case, the path is just /todos. All right. And then it's going to have a function here that accepts a request object and a response object. So then it's just a callback. And so here, all I need to do is I just need to return all the to-dos I have stored. So in this case, I just need to return everything that's in that map I have up here. So I'll just do um, res, which is response, and I'll do send, and then I'll do to-dos dot values. Basically, this will send all of the values as JSON to the client user. The next thing we wanted to do was we wanted to have a post method. And this post method would allow us to create users. So I'm going to do post create, not users, to-dos. And it's a similar process to up here. It'll just be a little bit different in the function. So I'll do app, and I won't do get this time because this isn't a get method. I'm going to use post instead. I'm going to also enter the path, and it happens to be the same path. And then I'm going to have request and then response. All right. And so what we need to do here is we need to read in the request data. Because the reason we need to read it in is we need to create a new object based off of what was given to us. So we have to read all of that data in. So what I can do is I can say const to data equals request dot body. And request.body just gets everything that was sent in that request, and it basically converts it to JSON. And so now that we have the actual data that was being sent to us, we need to actually create the new to-do. So what I'll do is I'll say to-dos dot set, and we'll do the to-do data dot ID, because remember in our JSON object there's an ID, and then we're going to set the value to to-do data. All right. And one thing I forgot to do in both of these was oh, sorry, I just forgot to do it in this one, is you need to send a code. Basically, the code tells the user if their request was successful or not. So I'm not going to get into too much detail of what each code means, but usually any code that is within the 200 to 300 range means that the request was successful. So that's exactly what we're going to do. We're just going to send a 200. So we're going to do response dot send. Actually, I think it's status, actually. Response.status 200. All right. And so that will add our new to-do into the app. Next, we wanted to do a delete, or sorry, not a delete, a patch. So this will just edit an existing to-do. And so similar process, we're going to do app, but this time we're going to do patch. And we're going to do a path, which will be slash to-dos again. And then we are going to pass in the request and the response. So you're starting to see the pattern here is pretty similar. It's just that in some of these methods, we do different things than other methods, but the structure is pretty much the same. So similar to post, we need to read in the data that the user gave us. So what we're going to do is we're going to do the same thing, which is grab that data from the request body. And then we need to find the data from our map, basically our storage, we're trying to find it. So I'll do const fetched to do equals to-dos dot get. And then we're going to, that data we were sent in with, we're going to look at the ID that they gave. So to-do data dot ID. And what we're going to do is we're going to update the data in the map. We'll do to-dos dot set to-do data dot ID, and then we are going to set it to whatever this to-do is. That'll basically update that value in the map. So now that I think of it, I actually don't need to fetch it from the map. That's just an extra step I don't need. So I can just simplify it to this. So we're reading the data from the user. And we're going into our map, looking that data up that our user gave us, and then setting it to that new value they gave us. All right. Finally, we're going to do the delete method, and this will delete an existing to-do. So here, once again, we're going to do app and then delete, and it's going to be the same path as it was for the others. And I'm going to do request, response, and right. So now all I need to do is I need to get the ID from the data that's being read in. So I'll do const to do data equals request body. And then I'm going to delete this from the map. Do to-dos dot delete, and I'm going to do the to-do data dot ID. So we're just deleting whatever is in that map based on the ID that was given to us. All right, so this is pretty much all the endpoints we need. Let's just see what happens when we run this. So I'll do node index.js. And as you can see, nothing happens. There's no server running or anything. That's because we actually have to start the server. To start the server, we just need to have it listen on a certain port on our computer. So let's do that. So to do that, we just do app.listen, and then we specify the port that we want it to listen on. In this case, I usually do 3000. Right? And now let's see if this does anything. Okay, so it's doing something, which means the server is probably started. So what I can do now is it binds by default to an address called 127.0.0.1. And this address is your local host. And basically, that is just your computer. So it's not actually being hosted anywhere. It's just running directly on your computer. So if I go ahead and open up a browser, for example, and I go to that address I stated earlier, and I have to switch the port to 3000, it's going to give me an error because it says cannot get slash. The reason I'm getting this error is because I didn't set a path that's just slash, right? It's slash to-dos. It's not just slash. But what I can do to show what happens if I did set it is I can do app.get. And instead, let me just do the slash. And I'll do request, response, and I'll do response.send, and I'll do hello world. Right? Let me stop this program now and rerun it. And let me refresh. And you can see here, it says hello world, because we're accessing that root right here, and I'm sending that in the root callback. Now, what happens if I do slash to-dos? You see I get an empty object. That should be an array. Let me see why that's not, but it should. See if this fixes it. Okay, now it's an empty array. And the reason it's empty is because we haven't actually created any to-dos. So let's go ahead and actually create some to-dos. So how do we do that? Well, we need to send in a JSON body. To do that, I usually use some sort of application that can do requests. One of my favorite ones to use is Postman, so I'm going to go ahead and open that now. All right. And I'm just going to go right click here, and after I get this pop-up out of the way, and hit add request. And I'm just going to call this create to do. And if you look here, it's going to give you a bunch of methods you can use. So we know for creating a to-do, we're using post. So I'm going to select post here. Then you need to enter a request URL. So in my case, it's going to be this URL. Okay. And let's see what happens. All right, I get an error. So what happened here? So if we look at the error in our terminal, you can see it says cannot read properties of undefined reading ID. So if we go to our post here, you see it's trying to read to-do data.id, and it's saying, oh, well, this is undefined. This doesn't exist. The reason is because we didn't pass in any JSON for it to parse. So it doesn't know what to do with that. So what we need to do is we actually need to pass in a to-do JSON in our request. So how do we do that? Well, in Postman, the way you would do it was you would go to your body here, and you'd actually add a body of JSON. So I'll go to body, and then I'll do raw. And then it'll give you a drop down here, and I choose JSON usually. And then we can actually enter the structure in JSON of our to-do. So first, as I saw in the presentation, we need to do ID. I'll just set it to a random number. Then next, we need to set if it was, or the name. So let's say this is my to-do. Next, we need to set when it was due by. I'll say mine is due Thursday. And then finally, we need to indicate if it's completed or not. So I'll do completed is false. I haven't done it yet. Okay, so let's see what happens now when I send it in. Okay, we still get an error. Let me see why it's giving this error. So I'm just going to print out to-do data and see why it's not liking that. Saying it's undefined. Post. Let me try res.body. Response.body. Let me just print out the response then. Yes. Okay. Oh, is it request dot? I'm gonna have to consult Stack Overflow on this. Apologies for this. Okay. So what I forgot to do here was I forgot to tell express that I need to use JSON. So the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to do app.use express.json. And basically this tells Express to use JSON. Because what I was doing before, it wasn't picking up what I was sending in. So let's try this again. We'll do request.body. See if this works. Okay, so that works, but if you notice here, it keeps going and going and going. So that's an issue. The reason this is happening is because I didn't send a response back. So if you don't send a response back, the server just thinks, oh, well, the backend is just thinking, even if the backend's actually done, which it is here, because you can see it's printing out what I sent in. So what we need to do is we need to make sure we're sending a response. So we'll do res.send, I believe, do 200 here, and then I can remove this. Let's see. Oh, wait, sorry. It's res.status, status 200.send. Okay, and you can see here, it actually went through, and you can see our status here. It says 200, which means it was successful. And if you actually hover over this, it'll give you what this code means. So now that we actually created a to-do, let's see what happens when we try to get all of the to-dos. So instead, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new request, and I'm going to call this get all to-dos. And it's going to be the same URL, and that's it. I don't need to enter anything else. So I'll just hit send. You can see here that that to-do I created earlier is being returned from that URL because it's now being stored, and now I'm telling it to fetch all of them. So if I go back to this create again, and let's say I want to create another to-do. Let's say I'll do 1, 2, 3, 4, and I'll do my to-do 2, and then I'll say this is due Friday. And it's not completed. Let's go ahead and send this in. All right, that we got a 200, which means it's okay. And now, if I go to my get all to dos, let's see what it does. You can see I have 2 to dos here now. So it's actually keeping everything that I created and it's sending it back to me. Okay, so what about patch? Let's say I want to update an already existing to do. So let's say my to do here is actually complete. I just need to update this to do. So what I'll do is I'll look at the ID here, which is 123, and I'll update that. So let's create another request, and I'll call this update to do. And so I'll set this method to patch because we're updating something we already have. And once again, it's the same URL. And this time, similar to post, we're going to have a body. We're going to select raw and then JSON. So what I need to put in this body is all the properties that I want to edit except the ID in the to-do. So the one I want to edit has an ID of 123. Sorry, this should be in a string. Right. And then I want to change it from incomplete to complete. So if you look at my get all to dos, this says complete is false, but I want to update it to be complete. So I'll go to my update to do, and I'll say, okay, now complete is set to true because we're done. We completed it. All right. Now let me go ahead and send that. And it's loading forever again. So let's see what's going on. So I actually forgot to send a response here. So it's just going to keep going on and on forever. So let's go ahead and fix that. And I'll do response.status 200.send because it was successful. Start up the server again, and let me create the to-do. So it's created. And now let me try the update to do again. So let's try and update this again. All right, and it says those 200 okay, so I know it updated properly. So now let me fetch all of my to-dos and see what happened. So you can see here, well, it did update it, but I didn't provide everything, so it got smaller, but it did update our to-do with the ID 1234 to be complete. So the update is working properly. Now, the last thing I want to do is I want to go ahead and delete a to-do. So before I do that, let me make sure that I'm returning a response. So I'll do res.status. And usually for delete endpoints, we return a 201, which means the deletion was successful, essentially. If it's anything else, it means something else. So we don't want to do that. So I'm going to just do 201 and then send. Okay. And let me go ahead and restart my server now that it was changed. Okay. So let me get all to-dos again. And it's empty because I restarted the server. I'm going to go ahead and create some more. Okay. Let me get all my to-dos again. All right, so my to-dos are back. And now let's say, okay, I want to delete that second to-do because I already have another to-do named my to-do too. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create yet another request. And this time it's going to be a delete request. Same URL. And we're also going to be using a body here. So I'll do raw and then JSON. Then all I need for a delete request is just the ID. I don't need anything else because it's going to look it up by the ID. So let me look at my get all to-dos. Okay, the ID of the second one is 12345. So I'm going to go ahead and use that ID. So 12345. If I send this, it should tell me, okay, it was deleted. So now if I go to get all to-dos and look at my database, you can see it's no longer there because we deleted it. So that's pretty much the basics of using Express.js. At this point, I'm just going to go ahead and open it up to any questions anyone has. Let me go back to Hopin. Oh, is my code too small? Here, let me zoom in a bit in case people can see. So here's my code. I didn't know if there was a specific part you needed to see, but yeah. I'm also going to be uploading this to GitHub afterwards, so you can reference it. So yeah. And let me go ahead and let me switch my window so I don't have to keep switching back and forth. All right. Okay. So yeah, this is my code. Any questions, or is that it? Okay. Okay, so William was asking, how can you handle an API that needs a key token? So I'm assuming you mean how to create an API that uses a key token. So that's a little bit more complex than what we're doing here, but basically the process of doing that is someone will, the backend will generate a key for you to use, and you will take that key, and it basically is proof that you have an account with them. That's the whole point of the key. And when the backend receives that key, it will compare it to its database and look at your user account and see if that key is present. And if it is present, it'll let you go through with the request. So yeah, did that answer your question? I don't know if I was being too wordy with that, but all right. Well, thank you everyone for attending my workshop, and I hope to see what you all create during the hackathon. So thank you.